Hey everyone, welcome back to Climb by VSC. Each week we interview innovative founders, category experts, and the most active climate investors about their perspectives, lessons, and best practices for company building and climate tech. Today I'm thrilled to be joined by our friend Tommy Leep, founding partner of Jetstream, investing in pre-seed climate, sustainability, and biodiversity startups. Tommy previously worked at AngelList, Haystack, and Floodgate, and has invested in startups like Robinhood, Patreon, Clubhouse, and Mercury. He started Jetstream to help climate tech startup founders get access to people and resources that they need to create a thriving planet. Tommy, I love that mission, and I'm so glad that you are joining me today on Climb.
Thanks, Jay. Great to be here. Great to speak with you.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, you have had a awesome experience working at some fantastic funds like Floodgate, with Congruent and Haystack. But as I understand it, your climate journey actually started with a book. So maybe let's kick our conversation off there. What was that book, and how did it lead you to launching your own climate-focused syndicate and fund with Jetstream?
Yeah, sounds great. I'll actually go back just a few months before that book, which was I left AngelList to join a startup that was about 10 people. I was there for 2 weeks, and the CEO told me, "Sorry, Tommy, I'm looking for something else in this role. It's not going to work out." And I mentioned that because it brought me into a serendipitous moment of landing on my climate journey. So I ended up speaking with some mentors and friends after the startup thing didn't work out. And one of them had been doing a bunch of research in the space, and he recommended this book. It's called An Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells. It's a story of basically all the bad things that could happen, many bad things that are already happening to the planet because of climate change, and what's to come if we don't change course. And I'm usually not someone who likes to talk about kind of the fatalism of climate change, but the book actually was a great kick in the pants for me. I think I read it in 2 days. I just couldn't put it down. And yeah, a lot of surprises. And I realized I also had some catching up to do. I hadn't ever seen kind of the Al Gore Inconvenient Truth. I hadn't really paid attention to what was going on in climate. But after reading the book, and I know Greta was getting prominent at the time. This was in the fall of 2019. Green New Deal was kicking around in Congress. We had some wildfires in California where I grew up, and it all just started to click for me. So I started to look around and try to figure out who in the VC and startup community was talking about climate change. And very few people were using that phrase, and not a whole lot of startups were in the space. I think Lower Carbon might have started by that point. YC had a carbon track. They weren't even calling it climate tech yet. And I decided that I would shift my syndicate investing that I had been going at the time in a more generalist way to focus on climate startups and just insert myself into that community. Yeah, and so that's where I met a few startups, including Pachama and Cyanide Technologies. Was fortunate to make some early investments there. I linked up with Congruent Ventures, a fund that focuses on climate and sustainability. Started learning from them, and was basically then on my way on doing my own climate investing as well.
Early on in your journey, you launched a newsletter, The Breeze, which I enjoyed going back through some of the early iterations of. And you echoed, I think, early on this sentiment from Albert Wenger, who is at Union Square Ventures, that if you're an investor today, there's no excuse for you not to invest in climate tech, as in that there is a opportunity for everyone within this sort of broad spectrum of things that we consider climate tech. A couple of years from that, do you still believe that is true? And if so, can you elaborate on this idea that as an investor, there's kind of something for everybody to invest in?
Yeah, absolutely. And even maybe now more than before. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Albert and Union Square Ventures. I would say it was kind of one of the pioneers of the bigger funds getting involved in the climate tech space. There are a lot of areas around climate. You could say climate tech is maybe a theme more than an industry. Energy, transportation, food and ag, even kind of the more consumery things like fashion. And then there are other kind of more, I don't know if you call them kind of like natural or earth-focused things like removing carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases from the environment, stopping the just general poisoning that we're doing of the earth by pouring a lot of chemicals into the soil, deforestation. So kind of across all of these areas, there certainly are ways for lots of people to get involved. I've chosen to focus primarily on investing in software, some robotics, some sensor companies, and a couple moonshots. But I think for other folks, I would say we call it CDR, carbon dioxide removal, is a big area of focus, and that can be using natural elements like capturing carbon in rocks, or geoengineering of different types of kind of putting different chemicals in the air to reflect sunlight. There are a lot of different areas that not my focus, as I don't have a big chemical or biological background. But yeah, I would invite anyone to find what is really exciting to them and get involved in that way.
I guess keeping on that theme a little bit, Tommy, what would you consider to be a underreported or an under-discussed opportunity within climate? Like, where do you think investors should really be turning their attention and time?
Yeah, I would say I think one of the most exciting areas is in energy, and the promise of kind of clean energy abundance. There are certainly a handful of ways to get there. There's a lot of research into fusion, even fission, space solar. But I think that because the opportunity of having just kind of big breakthrough energy technology is so great and can be so game changing, I would wish that more investors spent their time there, particularly people who have scientific backgrounds and capabilities to evaluate and invest in those companies. I think Lower Carbon just launched a fusion fund, which is really promising. I'm excited about that. I'd say I think the rewards there for being able to provide a great abundance of energy are high, not just kind of financially, but geopolitically. And then a lot of humans depend on energy. There are kind of a number of theories around kind of civilizational shifts based on energy consumption that I think if we can really unlock energy in a massive way, it'll benefit humanity in a great way.
Do you think there's a structural challenge with that? Because I struggle with that problem as well, right? I mean, we are a 10-year fund at VSC, and we traditionally are investing in, while we are active in climate tech, we're looking at a couple different categories, and you have to almost think about your fund's life vis-a-vis how long a technology takes to get to maturity, right? Do you think that has to change to get more VCs involved in energy, or are there venture scale, unicorn scale opportunities even today for VCs to get involved?
Yeah, there certainly are unicorn opportunities today. We can. I think the kind of among the more interesting areas are some of these big kind of industrial shifts. If you think of the economy as, if we take climate change seriously, then eventually we'll go towards a low carbon or zero carbon economy. And for that to happen, we need some big shifts across many areas of the economy and many industrial areas. So I think for those funds that are in a position where they can make, big financial investments in these industrial shifts, good things are going to happen. Like we saw in electric vehicles with Tesla. We might see something similar in material usage in buildings, like low carbon or zero carbon concrete, steel, cement, like those kinds of things. So for those funds that can do that, it probably takes some big funds that can continue supporting those companies for a long time. I run a pre-seed fund. It's a small fund. We invest really early, take a lot of risk. But I don't, I write a $250K check into the companies I invest in. And in a way, given my fund size, I choose to invest more in software companies that can be enabling layers to a lot of these shifts.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to that point of there is something for everyone, there has to be enough sort of opportunities up and down that stack, right? Especially
Right.
with the amount of money that's coming out from governments, even with the Inflation Reduction Act or governments across the world. There is anything up from growth stage private equity all the way to folks like you and I that are doing pre-seed and early stage.
Yeah, I hope there's opportunities for everyone, because there are a lot of funds coming in at many different stages, in the billions of dollars, and that's fantastic for where we want to go. But I do think there's a lot to go around. I would also mention on this, opportunity for everyone, not just in VC, but kind of in different disciplines, is we're seeing a lot of interesting combinations of kind of new VC, maybe partnership formation, where we're seeing a lot of deep tech PhDs partnering with maybe generalist VCs to then invest in kind of some of these new groundbreaking technologies. So like it's cool seeing a lot of scientists being pulled in outside of what we might have been used to in the last 10, 20 years of kind of purely software things, but now more into these harder technologies.
Let's talk a little bit about that then. So, I love that in your investment range, you've done some hardware and robotics. You've obviously done software platforms where you're focusing, some energy management companies. Can you talk about an investment that you feel especially excited about and talk a little bit about what drew you to that deal?
Sure. Yeah, I think a really fun one is one called Simplifiber, which is a company that is using a biodegradable material to make new clothing products that can then be biodegraded and recycled and reused. And they're starting with shoes. And so they're making a shoe that over time, after its use, can be fully biodegraded. So the kind of interesting thing with clothing, I think on average, Americans buy a clothing item and wear it 7 times and then throw it away. And the numbers are crazy kind of worldwide. I think we produce like 130 billion articles of clothing.
Wow.
And yeah, maybe only 80 billion of them are bought and even used. And so 50 billion just goes straight into waste. So it's almost as if clothing is a stream of producing something and then going right into waste. So there are lots of issues with that. There are a lot of emissions that come off of that. They're kind of social issues as well, kind of working conditions. What's cool about Simplifiber is they have a materials innovation, but then also production innovation. They are making the shoes completely with machines, so they remove some of the labor. And the whole idea is that to be able to disrupt and shift the way that clothing is produced, you actually have to do it cheaper. You can't kind of beat it by kind of using the same old way. And so to do it cheaper, you have to create a new production method. So they take this kind of liquid cellulose-based material, they put it through a 3D printing or kind of pressing manufacturing technology, and then they end up with the formed shoe after that. And at scale, because they use machines and not people, they'll be able to do this at much cheaper than kind of even the least expensive factories around the world that use labor. And then presumably by being able to undercut a lot of the production pricing, they'll be able to mass produce clothing that can, be thrown away or discarded in a safer and healthier way.
And did the founder come from an industry because this seems like a very highly technical, chemical engineering problem? Did the founder come from this? Like, what drew you to this opportunity?
Yeah, so the two founders, the CEO, Maria, came from fashion. So she'd been working with many materials over kind of a 20-year career at a lot of the big houses in fashion. And then her co-founder, Phil, is a startup operator, had started a handful of companies. And then they partnered with a few labs, and since then they've brought kind of all the materials and the manufacturing in-house in their new headquarters in North Carolina. Yeah. So it's kind of one of these interesting combinations using new technology and expertise from an industry that Maria had spent time in trying to build more sustainable things. And she realized that she'd have to go outside that industry to be able to change it.
Yeah. I mean, I struggle with this a lot when we see, these pre-seed opportunities. You talked about this magical combination of a scientist or practitioner meeting a startup operator. We're seeing that more and more on our end as well. But I guess given how early you're investing, I'm assuming it's sometimes pre-launch or even pre-product, how does one effectively evaluate climate companies that early? Like, what are the markers of success that you're looking for when you know something is a great investment for Jetstream?
Sure. Yeah, I would say I lean a bit more on kind of the markers or the characteristics that I picked up over the last 10 or 11 years of being in more generalist VC roles. So things like, market that is maybe emerging, growing, has potential to be really big. Product that I like to think of has a uniqueness to it at the pre-seed stage. It doesn't have to be defensible or have a big moat because it's just still too early. And at pre-seed, I almost expect there to be 2 or 3 iterations on the product. And so I'm looking for a uniqueness to it that others potentially can replicate. And then the founding team, if it's kind of 2 or 3 founders, I would want to see exceptionalism or some characteristics that show determination and capability kind of among all three. Not just kind of one really great person, but a founding team that's very strong across the board. And then the last thing for me is really, it's kind of more of a personal thing when I choose to invest. It's just fit for me. Can I offer something unique to this company? Do I think that they could use my help, particularly? And, do I like the founder style? Do we have a good kind of working relationship? Because I'm expecting to be in a 10-year relationship with them. If everything goes well, and if things go well or even don't, maybe those founders want to build another company, and I'd love to be in a position to invest in them again.
I'm glad you mentioned that part about going into the conversation or going into this relationship, assuming it's going to be a 10-year relationship. And I think the last couple of years, I'm curious for your perspective on this, there have been a lot of, pardon the phrase, shotgun marriages, where there's a lot of capital out there, a lot of deals were getting done. And it seems like now everybody's kind of waking up and again, to follow the analogy, seeing who they're in bed with. How do you, looking at sort of the next couple of years, do you expect that to change? Do you feel like climate founders are spending time getting to know their investors? Or is it much like general tech where it was like, hey, whoever has the cheapest, quickest capital, so to speak, that's who we go with?
Yeah. Probably these days, just given where the market is, founders are spending more time with investors, and vice versa. Investors probably spending more time kind of vetting and getting to know founders. One of the nice things about kind of where I'm investing is usually I do have some time, a month or two, where I can get to know founders. Actually, a lot of my best investments, I've gotten to know founders over some years, and then they get in touch with me when they're actually starting a company. And we partner up there with them. But yeah, even I think part of my strategy as a pre-seed investor is I of course want to see my companies go raise seed rounds and Series A rounds, and so I like to put them in touch with the investors who I think would be a good fit for them. Relatively early, get conversations going so that there can be some relationship building over time. I don't really think that the kind of purely transactional capital markets really serve founders or investors. And in a way, there's, there is a positive side to the economy and kind of this pace of investing slowing down a bit, so that kind of all parties can get more comfortable with each other, with the relationships that they're going into for, hopefully and possibly a long time.
Yeah. Is there anything in particular that surprised you, or I guess I'll say what surprised you the most coming from being a general tech investor for so many years to then shifting focus completely onto climate innovation?
Sure. I think the big thing is that there are many industries within climate. As I was saying earlier, like energy itself is just a beast of an industry. There are people who invest just across that. There are founders who spend their entire careers in that area. There's a lot to understand there. So, over the last 3 years and just kind of continuing today, I'm still very much a student of these markets and industries. I think kind of classically, the best founders are the ones that deeply understand their industries and kind of can effectively tell investors, can pull the future back to the present and teach us, how things might play out, and are really great communicators in that as well. So I find I'm mostly learning from founders and being in conversation with founders, other investors as well who've spent time in this space, and then I try to stay on the pulse of kind of what's coming up, what's around the corner. For example, carbon credits might be, kind of the carbon credit marketplaces. There are a number of startups in this space now. A few years ago, when I invested in Pachama, it's still relatively young, and so that area has blossomed a bit. So what's the next one kind of there now? It's like, well, you might say something like biodiversity or nature-based solutions, where there's kind of, we're thinking about land, but not just for its carbon credits, but maybe for its other value, kind of other intrinsic values. So that might be a space that over the next 2-3 years, we'll see kind of exciting things happen in.
Yeah. I'm asking mostly selfishly, but are there resources that you turn to or things that you're kind of reading on a daily or weekly basis that you feel like is giving you a really good digest into some of these deeper categories?
Yeah, nothing kind of methodical. I think, again, kind of back to the network, lean into my network for kind of connections and information. I try to, maybe just kind of follow people on Twitter who I think are really smart and read content there. I think kind of the founders and investors who are studying these spaces tend to be really good leading indicators. I personally haven't gone too deep into kind of like, deeper research that kind of folks publish. I haven't really found anything that works for me there. But yeah, it's really nice when people write their thoughts out online.
Yeah, I'm still looking, Tommy. So when you do, let me know, because I think there's some newsletters that I enjoy, and I think there's some good folks that I think do aggregation of really good reporting. But yeah, that sort of like, the way we had leading voices in like social and mobile, and folks that were talking about sort of the psychology of customer acquisition and adoption there. We're still early days in climate for that, right? I still feel like I'm missing those little daily reads, so to speak.
Sure. Yeah, I'd say the other kind of my other strategy, I guess, or what I find myself doing is going to the edges of my network as much as possible. I'm a big fan of the kind of I think it was Mark Granovetter, who wrote a piece called "The Strength of Weak Ties," where he talks about the best information flow is from people who are actually the least like you. Maybe you have some affinity towards, but they're just very different from you in kind of industry and interests. Because they are so different, they can share things that you might not have heard of. So I like kind of in the sense of, one side just trying to stay in motion in conversation with folks, and then the other, pushing out into the network and trying to pick up interesting signals from interesting people, I think is another way to roll.
I like that. I haven't heard that, and I'm going to go check out that piece, but it's a really interesting way to think about it, to find folks that are on the edges of your network. You talked about one of the ways that you're helping your pre-seed companies is getting them ready for that seed stage raise. We love to talk about scaling tactics on Climb for a lot of our climate startups. Given how early you're investing, what are a couple of things that pre-seed climate companies can start doing early on to ensure they have that successful seed stage raise?
Great. Yeah, I think the big one is getting to, well, one, just a business model that's compelling, that clicks for your customers and, for your capabilities. And then, that also leaves a little excitement for investors. So, one of my early investments out of the fund, we spent the better part of the spring and summer kind of iterating until we landed on something that could use the technology that they had built in kind of a new way. So I think kind of one for pre-seed companies, it's expect to iterate, have a point of view and an angle, but then when you hit the market, kind of expect to learn and iterate. So that's something I'd like to work with founders on. And then two, a lot of that can also then turn into what's the story we tell about the company to customers, but even more so to investors, and how can we start piloting that idea, piloting kind of the narrative. So I really like doing a little bit of the narrative design with founders as well, because it's so integrated with the strategy and with what we want to create in the world. I would say those are maybe kind of the two big things. Iterate and design a compelling story.
I'm going to touch on that second piece there. I know this wasn't initially the direction I was going to take this, but given how much narrative building is part of what we do at VSC, sure. What are a couple of the tips and tricks? Like, what's the process you take them through to ensure that they're telling the effective story, whether it's to customers or to investors? Yeah.
So, oh man, I'm blanking a bit on the name, but there's a great Medium post called "The Greatest Sales Deck I've Ever Seen" or I've ever read, and it lays out a really nice story framework that I think has just some really kind of well said points. One of them is great stories start with change. So it's really nice to have a point of view or to be able to talk about a change that's going to happen. So I like to kind of, part of the pitch I give founders is, imagine we're sitting here, we look up in the sky and there's a giant Death Star being built. It's just happening. I have no influence on it. You don't either. There's maybe nothing we can really do about it, but it's happening. But because that's being built, it actually has some implications. Then there's some stakes that are created. So the change creates some stakes. And usually those stakes are some bad thing is going to happen. So what's a bad thing that's going to happen, kind of given the way things are currently going? And then before introducing, like, this is what my product does to stop the bad thing, what's the promised land we want to get to first? Like, level set with me on where we think the world should go. And then that creates the context of under which I can introduce my product. So there's this change happening, some stakes are created. This is actually where we want the world to go. And if I can follow that, then I'm primed and I'm ready now to hear about your product. But if you just come at me with your product and you say, like, hey, I have a lightsaber, it's like, okay, like, I get that it's a cool lightsaber, cool toy, but I need to understand it within the context of, there's an evil empire building this Death Star that can shoot a giant laser beam at us and destroy our planet. And don't we want to be free and safe? And that's why we have the Rebel Alliance and the Force and lightsabers. Like, that's what I'm talking about. Let's go get them.
What I love about that answer is that it implicitly answers the why now. And I think a lot of climate startups that at least have pitched us sort of start with the assumption that, like, because they have spent their life in it, or how much time they have spent building this company, they implicitly understand the urgency of the problem. Right. But given how broad climate tech is, sitting back here, I may not actually understand the why now of why heat pumps need to be replaced because of the inefficiency. But when you sit there and you make the problem real and you actually describe the change as you're talking about that's happening, then the why now and the urgency becomes that much more implicit. And from a purely capitalist standpoint, if there is an urgency, then likely there's a willingness to spend, right? Yeah. And so I think it's a great framework because it answers that very important question that a lot of folks, I think, gloss over a little too quickly.
Yeah, and I would say, a lot, kind of another like feedback I get on it is, like, VCs, they want things in a structured way. They want the why now slide. They want the, like, what's the TAM slide? What's this slide and this? It's like, yes, they want that information. But actually what they really want is they want someone to tell them the story in a compelling way that they can believe. They want to believe. So, you can give me all the data, but it needs to be couched in or kind of flowing through something that helps me believe. And it's really hard as a founder to pull yourself out of, the nitty gritty details of, like, here's what's great about my heat pump. But if you can, and it might take some coaching, then, you can basically tell a compelling story that gets your investors to believe. And then you can bring in the data that helps support what you've encouraged them to believe.
Yeah. On that idea of coaching, is there a way to, like, test for that in your diligence? You have really impressive folks that, whether they're coming from industry or they're coming from having built startups, when you are going through your diligence process to make sure that they're a fit for you, what are the ways that you test for that?
Good question. It's a balance, because on one side, I do want founders that have a strong opinion about, what they're building. And then on the other side, I do want them to see that kind of what I'm offering or what I can help with is something that they would listen to. Sometimes it's as simple as, if I'm kind of trying to understand a pitch deck or trying to understand what the company is doing, if I just kind of repeat it back to them in a way that I would try to understand it and see if that resonates with them, or if they then start using that, or if they kind of take any of my feedback and incorporate it in something. Again, it does also come back to being able to have a few shots on goal with them as far as, conversations and, Zoom sessions or walk and talks, just to get to know them personally a bit too. But yeah, one of the nice things about, investing out of a fund and having a kind of concentrated portfolio is that I do want to pick people with whom, I have a partnership that can be a two-way street, where I can learn from them, they can learn from me. And, the whole point is to then help them grow the business they're building. Yeah.
Yeah. I mentioned at the top that you have worked with some really storied and experienced investors over your career in general tech. Is there any advice or lessons that you still carry with you now that you have, struck out on your own to build Jetstream?
I was just writing an LP update today, and I think I mentioned Mike Maples isms like 2 or 3 times, having started my career at Floodgate back in 2011. Lots of nuggets there. One of them was, just the idea of, he had some list of, questions that he would ask in a boardroom. And for example, 1, is our market growing? 2, is our position in the market growing? And then there were a couple others I don't remember off the top of my head. But if you get even just those 2 things right, then good things are going to happen to the startup. So then you back out of that. It's like, okay, we want to enter a growing market and we want a vector such that our position in the market can grow. It's simple frameworks, but really clear.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Mike has also been somebody who's published quite a bit and has been sort of very active talking about investing at this stage for so long. So I remember when I got started in venture, his stuff, and then I think Bill Gurley's Above the Crowd were a few of the things that I really turned to as well. But yeah, it's those simple frameworks that allow you to apply it to any category, such that when climate tech becomes something that we all collectively say, this is an urgent problem, we can bring some of those frameworks from general tech over here, as we talked about earlier on.
If I can, I also want to give a shout out to Semel Shah, who founded and runs Haystack. He's maybe someone who I admire, maybe foremost because he's doing venture in his own way, and he produced all sorts of content on TechCrunch. He's very active on Twitter. He's helped maybe a bajillion people in the ecosystem. And I think what's wonderful about being able to see him build his business and kind of see his style is that it's given me permission to figure out what is my way that I want to do venture. And I think that would also be my encouragement to anyone who is a climate investor or considering it, is that you can do it in your own way. It doesn't have to look like what other people's funds or strategies look like. Jay, I think this is one of your strengths, to be able to, speak with people and produce really helpful media and content. I love that you do this. I wouldn't do this on my own, but, I might be behind the scenes kind of meeting many people and then, connecting you to folks that I might be helpful to you. So that's another, VC who I think is, just really, really wonderful.
Yeah, no, Samuel's another one whose content I think has just gotten better and better, over the many, many years that he's been writing about it. I'm always, when I speak to guys like him or Hunter Walk, I'm honestly just impressed with the level of clarity, but then also just the pace and the cadence of content that they're able to put out. This is so much easier to me, honestly. Doing a podcast, talking, I would do this if the mic was off. I would just be having conversations with people. To sit down and actually write it down with that level of clarity is a level unto itself. So I'm continually impressed by those guys. That's great, Tommy. I'm glad to hear that, and always helpful to hear where your influences and anybody's influences lie in this business. Where we'll close, and I like to always close with a little bit of optimism, because I think the public discourse and narrative, the word you used was fatalism. I like to think, it's getting very bleak to the point of being demotivating. So to leave our listeners on a sense of urgency, but also optimism, what is something that gives you hope or gives you optimism in this ongoing fight against climate change?
Yeah, I think I would say that, for myself, for the last 11 years as a VC, I've always been interested about pushing technology forward. Often for the purpose of connecting people or making people's lives easier. But I think what's unique about kind of the climate tech approach is it's very focused on how can we make the planet better? How can we make humanity safer, or how can we help humanity thrive? There's a lot more heart there than, kind of in my kind of experience the last few years than just kind of technology for the purpose of technology, which has its merits. But for folks who are interested in climate, I think it's really lovely, and I think you'll find kind of the heart alignment is really nice.
Yeah, and it makes it easier when you are hiring for a team, right? And it makes it easier when you are recruiting a co-founder, or when the days get tough and you're mission aligned versus, look, everybody wants to make money, and we are in a capitalist society, and that's our system. But every good entrepreneur knows it's not a linear sort of straight path up and to the right. And so on those hard days, that heart, having that sort of mission alignment is huge, I think. And I would very much agree with you there. So Tommy, I think, two big things that I take away from our conversation today. One is, as you are starting to grow your understanding, look at the sort of margins of your network and find the people there. I love how you phrase that. I'm going to carry that with me and think about who are on the margins of my network that I could learn from as I'm exploring climate tech myself. And I think the second piece is really about looking at these relationships as 10-year relationships. And they may not end up there, or they may. The first company that somebody starts may not be successful, but the second one will be. And because you have looked at that long-term relationship and done right by that person as an investor, but also as a founder looking for an investor, it's a long business. It really is, especially as early as we invest. It's a very long business. So keeping that as your North Star, I think, is something that I'm taking away from this conversation as well. Tommy Leep, thank you so much for joining me on Climb and for sharing your journey with Jetstream today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Jay. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. Talk soon.